The sound of tearing fabric is something you never forget. It stays with you, sharp and final, like a slap. And when it happens in front of 200 people, in a room full of crystal glasses and chandelier light and women in designer gowns, it doesn't just embarrass you. It breaks something open inside you, something you spent a long time trying to protect. I stood there in the middle of that ballroom with my dress hanging off my shoulder, my face burning, my hands shaking at my sides. Every single person in that room was staring at me, and the woman who did it was standing right there, covering her mouth with one hand, her eyes bright and alive with something that wasn't even close to regret. But here's what nobody in that room knew. Here's what I didn't even fully realize in that moment as I stood there trying not to cry. My father was already walking through those doors, and he was smiling. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with a dress, and it didn't start with that party. It started with who I am, and with a family that decided, before they ever really knew me, that I wasn't enough. My name is. I grew up in Ohio, small town. The kind of place where the same families have owned the same businesses for 3 generations, where everybody waves at everybody on the main street, and where your business is never really just your own. My mother, Sandra, raised me by herself. She worked double shifts at the diner on Route 9, came home every night smelling like coffee and fried food and exhaustion, and still found a way to sit with me at the kitchen table and ask about my day. Every single night, without fail. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We were steady. I wore clearance rack clothes and drove a second-hand Civic and did my own nails and clipped coupons out of the Sunday paper. And I was happy, genuinely happy. I became an elementary school reading teacher because I wanted to, because I loved watching kids discover that words had power. I had a small apartment, a good life, and a clear sense of who I was. I say all of that because it matters. It matters that I knew who I was before Daniel ever walked into my life. I met him at the county fair, of all places. He was visiting a college friend in town and got stuck behind me in the funnel cake line. He made a joke about powdered sugar being a personality type, and I laughed so hard I snorted, which usually would have me. But he lit up like it was the best thing he'd heard all year. We talked for 4 hours that night. He never mentioned his family, never mentioned money. He just talked to me like I was the most interesting person in the room. 3 months later, he asked me to come meet his family in Connecticut. That was the moment everything shifted. The estate was in Greenwich. Stone driveway, ivy crawling up the walls, a fountain in the front yard. I sat in Daniel's car gripping my purse strap, wearing the nicest dress I owned, a navy blue wrap dress I'd bought on sale 2 years before, and I told myself to just be myself. That was my first mistake, not because being myself was wrong, but because I had no idea what I was walking into. Daniel's mother was a woman who had been beautiful her whole life and had built an entire personality around that fact. Silver hair, perfectly set, pearls at her throat. She extended her hand to me at the door and said, "So Daniel has told us so much about you." She smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. His sisters were worse. Was 28, Daniel's older sister, sharp features, sharp tongue, and the particular kind of cruelty that dresses itself up as humor so you can never quite call it what it is. Was 25 and didn't even bother with the pretense of politeness. She looked at me, then looked at Daniel, then looked back at me and laughed once through her nose. One small, quiet laugh. That was my introduction to the women. I stayed anyway, because Daniel held my hand through dinner and said quietly that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And I believed him. I still believe he meant it. The next 2 years were what I would call being made to feel small, always through small things, never one big confrontation I could actually push back against. There was the Christmas dinner where mentioned, while passing the bread rolls, that Daniel had dated a girl named Victoria before me. "She summers in the Hamptons," said pleasantly. "Lovely family." Then she looked at me and added, "But I suppose there's something charming about authenticity." There was the text sent me once, a photo of a designer handbag, with a message saying she was going to get one for Daniel's girlfriend, then a follow-up saying, "Never mind." I probably wouldn't even know what it was. There was, every single visit, asking whether I had thought about going back to school, whether I had considered a more professional career path, whether I had looked into this program or that opportunity, as if teaching children to read was something embarrassing that needed to be fixed. Daniel saw some of it. He would frown and say to ignore them, that they were like this with everyone. But they weren't. I watched them with other guests, other friends. They were warm, funny, generous. It was only me who got the careful, measured version of their disdain. I was the wrong kind of person for their world, and they needed me to know it and to leave on my own, because asking me to leave directly would have cost them Daniel. I should have walked away, I know that now, but I loved him, and then he proposed. He did it on a Tuesday night in our kitchen, while I was still in my work clothes and pasta was boiling on the stove. Down on one knee on the tile floor, holding a simple round solitaire on a thin gold band. He said he had looked at 100 rings, and none of them felt like me until he saw this one. Clean, real, and beautiful. I said yes before he finished the sentence. When we told his family, smiled with her mouth again, hugged Daniel for a long time and didn't touch me at all. Said, "Oh, wow, that was fast." 3 weeks later, announced she was throwing an engagement party at the estate. 200 guests, formal attire, a catered dinner. She handed me a card with a list of suggested designers I should wear. I understood exactly what that card was: an opportunity, dressed up as a gift. If I showed up in something she couldn't criticize, she would find another angle. And if I showed up in something she could, she would use it. I bought a white lace midi dress from a boutique in the city. It wasn't designer, but it was elegant and it fit beautifully and it was mine. I told myself that was enough. The night of the party, standing in front of the mirror in the guest room, hair pinned up, my mother's pearl earrings at my ears, the real ones, the only nice thing she owned, which she had mailed to me with a card that just said, "Wear these and hold your head up." I felt beautiful. Quietly, privately, stubbornly beautiful. Daniel came to get me and whispered that I looked incredible. I let myself believe the night might be okay. For the first hour, it was. Champagne, polite conversation, Daniel beside me the whole time. Then his father pulled him aside to speak with some business associates, and Daniel mouthed 5 minutes at me across the room. Found me in 4. She came with, both of them in floor-length gowns, both wearing their mother's pearls, both smiling the same smile. Said she was glad I had found something to wear, that it must be difficult not knowing anyone who could help with those things. I smiled back. I had gotten very good at smiling. Then reached out to touch my arm or to gesture. I'll never know exactly what she intended the motion to look like, and her hand caught the shoulder seam of my dress. Whether she meant to or not, I know what I know. I heard the fabric tear. I felt the lace pull away from the bodice. In 1 second, the entire right shoulder of my dress came apart, and I was standing in the middle of the ballroom, shoulder bare, dress hanging off me, 200 people turning to look. Covered her mouth. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, I tripped." Her eyes were shining. She was not sorry at all. Made a soft sound, not quite a gasp, and said, loud enough for the nearest 20 people to hear, "Oh, sweetheart. I did think that fabric looked a little delicate. This is exactly why we sent the dress code suggestions." The room was not silent. It was worse than silent. It was full of the specific sound of people pretending not to stare while they stared. Whispers behind champagne glasses. A woman near the back who didn't bother to whisper at all. I felt the tears coming and I hated myself for it. Hated that they were winning. Hated that 2 years of careful, practiced composure was about to dissolve in front of everyone because of a torn seam and a room full of witnesses. And then the doors opened. I heard it before I saw it, a shift in the room, that particular quality of silence that falls when someone significant enters a space. Not loud or theatrical. The other kind. The kind that real, quiet power carries without even trying. I turned around. Tall, silver-haired, dark suit, no tie. The kind of man who looks like he belongs everywhere without ever seeming to think about it. His name was Robert, and he was my father. I know I need to explain this. My parents separated before I was born. My mother was proud and stubborn and wanted nothing from the name, because yes, there was a name, and there was money behind it, significant money, the kind that gets buildings named after you. She raised me entirely on her own terms, and I loved her fiercely for it. I kept my father at arm's length for most of my childhood out of loyalty to her pain. But as an adult, we had quietly rebuilt something. Phone calls. Dinner a few times a year. He knew about Daniel. He had been invited to the party. And not once, not in 2 years, had I mentioned to the who my father was. Not because I was hiding it, but because it was not the point. I was not with Daniel because of a name or a balance sheet. I didn't want to be accepted because of someone else's identity. I wanted to be accepted because of my own, and so I had said nothing. Standing there with my dress torn and my shoulder bare, and's voice still hanging in the air, I was very glad he had come. He crossed the room toward me without hurrying. He reached me before anyone else could move, took off his jacket without a word, and settled it over my shoulders. Gently, deliberately, the way a father does when he wants you to know he sees exactly what happened and he is not going to pretend otherwise. He looked at me and said quietly, "You okay, kiddo?" I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. Then he turned around. Had gone the color of old paper. She recognized him, of course she did. Robert's face had been in Forbes. His name was on a hospital wing in Boston. He had developed 3 buildings in Manhattan and chaired a foundation that had donated more money to public education in the last decade than most corporations spend in a lifetime. He was not a man would fail to recognize. He walked over to her slowly and shook her hand and said, "What a beautiful home." His voice was perfectly pleasant, entirely controlled. "I wanted to be here tonight to celebrate my daughter's engagement. I'm glad I came. It seems she needed some support." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't point at anyone. He said it the way you say something that everyone in the room already understands, so that there is no confusion later about what was witnessed and by whom. Looked like she had swallowed something sharp. Had gone perfectly still. Daniel appeared at my side then, his eyes moving between me and my father. He had never met him in person. I watched him understand slowly, then all at once, and I waited for his reaction. He put his arm around me, looked at his family, and then looked at my father and said, "Sir, I'm Daniel. I love your daughter. I'm sorry for what happened here tonight." My father looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that takes a person's measure. Then he nodded once and said, "I believe you." The rest of the evening was quieter. Made a point of telling me before the night was over that my earrings were lovely. My mother's pearls. Not real, as it happens. My mother bought them at a department store in 1987. But I smiled and said thank you and did not tell her that. Didn't speak to me again. Disappeared somewhere around dessert. Daniel and I sat on the back porch until 2 in the morning with cups of tea gone cold. He apologized for his family. He apologized for choosing peace over honesty for too long. He said he was done with that. I believed him then too. His mother called 3 days later and invited me to lunch, just the 2 of us. She wasn't warm at that lunch. I don't know that she is capable of warm, not really. But she was careful, measured in a different way than before. Like a woman who has been playing a game on a board she didn't fully understand and has decided, quietly, to stop playing. We are not close. I don't imagine we ever will be. But I can sit across a table from her now without my hands shaking, and that is something. My father called me the morning after the party. He didn't gloat. He didn't say he told me so. He just said that my mother had raised me right and that he had wanted to show up. I cried for about 20 minutes after we hung up. Not sad tears, the other kind. Here is what I want you to take from all of this. People who need to humiliate you to feel powerful are terrified of you. They always have been. And looked at me and saw something they couldn't categorize, couldn't control, and couldn't buy. And so they tried to strip it away from me with a handful of torn lace in front of 200 witnesses. They thought the dress was the point. They thought the room full of people was the point. They were wrong. You cannot humiliate someone who knows exactly who they are. And I know who I am. I grew up in Ohio. I drive a second-hand car and cut coupons and teach children that words have power. I wore my mother's department store pearls to an estate in Greenwich, and I held my head up because she told me to. And when my dress was torn and the room was starring and everything in me wanted to fall apart, I didn't. My father walked through those doors smiling because he was proud of me. Not proud of his name, not proud of his money, proud of me. That is worth more than any dress that was ever made. If there is someone in your life right now who is making you feel like you are not enough, remember that they are only doing it because they looked at you and saw something they cannot touch. Don't let them make you doubt it, not for a single second.